Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CDH. I'm one of your hosts, Reed, aka Sick Robot, and I'm joined by Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going, everyone?
So in this episode, we're going to be covering decks changing over time, sort of somewhat on the nose for current situation of the podcast, but I think it'll work well. So we're just gonna hop into housekeeping. Yeah, we're back after a lengthy hiatus. Sorry about that one.
Yeah, it's been sort of a weird little while, and we've missed you all very much. But looks like we're sort of in a position where we not only are obviously recording this episode, but might have sort of we're hoping that we can transition back into a regular cadence of uploads, at least one a month. Not sure we can get straight back to two a month, but
yeah.
We will see.
Hopefully, a bit of a better schedule now, and we've sort of worked stuff out. It's been I feel like a very busy previous, 4 months or 5 months.
It's been it's been just a lot going on in a lot of different ways.
So we're sort of hopping back into it. I guess we should probably, do a quick coverage of, let's do what's coming up first, and we can sort of
I feel like let's get that out of the
stuff
way
afterward. So the big ones that are coming up for us on the podcast, yes, we are still active in going out to events, not as much, but we're doing it when we can. Big one, not at all related to CDH, but it's still a big one that we're going to, is myself, Morgan, and a few other friends are going to be heading down to CubeCon in Minneapolis. I believe ticket sales are closed. Madison. Well, let me do that. Can I do that ad read back to the top?
No.
Put some more editing on Morgan's plate. All right. Madison, Wisconsin. It's going to be a good time. I think ticket sales might be closed already, but if anybody is coming, we'd love to be able to say hi, chat for a bit, and play some sick ass cubes. I think this is gonna be a good time. I've sort of wanted to go to CubeCon since its inception, and now's just perfect time to do so. Especially now that I've actually gotten more than one testing pod with my own personal cube.
True. Yeah. It's gonna be a good time. Definitely looking forward to trying out. I was looking at the list of cubes, and I got halfway through it, and I was like, there are so many cubes that I want to try here, and I'm only halfway through
There
the
are
list.
some good ones.
So, should be a heck of a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And then in terms of next tournament stuff, there might be some individual ones that people go to. I wouldn't be surprised if Morgan finds himself at a tournament in the nearish future, if it's semi-locally local. But I think the big one that we're going to be trying to get out to is the King's. It is King's Court, right? Right? I got it.
Yeah,
okay.
King's Court Gaming.
King's Court Gaming Boston 8K tournament that's going to be going on in February at a time that I probably should have pulled up before then, but it's sometime in there. We'll put it in
my favorite part
Reedism.
of February, January.
January, there you go. I thought it was early. Okay, is it early January? No, it's late January, right? I thought it was
mid to late January.
Early.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I thought it was. Never mind. Anyway, January. Awesome. Me having not pulled up any notes on events that we're going to ahead of the podcast has not changed and will not change. Live with it.
Look,
anyway,
he's got show notes. That's really all we can expect. Let's just take
good
what
enough.
we can get.
So myself, Morgan, I believe Lyndon, and friend of the show, longtime friend of the show, Zach, are going to be making the pilgrimage out to Boston again in the beginning of next year, and I think it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a real good time, methinks. Love to see the Boston boys. Love me some Boston boys. And it's nice to be back in Chowdertown.
Yeah.
So ticket sales should be open. Yep.
Things because I gotta do this job for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's January
buying time.
11th and 12th of 2025. It's technically not at Boston, but just outside the Royal Rumble. We can throw a link in the description just in case.
Yeah, absolutely. throw one in for both of these, actually. Beautiful. Cool. So yeah, I think sign-up should still be open. I think there's more than enough seats left to be out. So go get those tickets while supplies last. It's gonna be a fun time. And then now that we've sort of gotten the stuff that's coming up out of the way, what have you been up to? Been up to more? I know some of what you've been up to.
Yeah, just I guess honestly, not really sowing chaos and destruction. Just watching chaos and destruction be sown and then reaped, and yeah, here we are. There's been a lot going on over the past. I mean, it's been going on over a while, but things really came to a head over the past couple of weeks. I guess, you know, we've I think historically tried to steer clear of talking about the CEDH community drama.
Yeah, broadly.
This
this
one's a little big, so I think we kind of have to acknowledge it as much as we love to live in our little ivory towers. So a few, I guess, last week. Jesus Christ, it feels so long.
Yeah,
ago already.
it's been
there was
already
an announcement. Just in case you're like not plugged into what's happening at all, just keep in mind that all the events we're about to describe, this all took place in like a week.
Yeah, most of it in less. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a proposal. So first, the Commander RC put out a statement that basically said, we're not. Well, it didn't exactly say we're not touching CEDH with a 10-foot pole, but that a lot of people read it that way, sort of being like, if you guys want to, you know, change things to rebalance your meta, you're going to have to do that. The Commander RC's not trying to balance for CEDH. And that made a lot of people upset. And one of the things that came out of that was a bunch of people, many of them, or some of them at least, affiliated with Top Deck, formerly Eminence Gaming, were like, we're going to make our own RC with blackjack and hookers. And they floated the idea. They gathered some people in the community, people who are, you know, relatively well known or have some chops in either tournament play or data or whatever. And they floated a preliminary ban list that I had some thoughts about that really aren't to this discussion, so we're just gonna skate by that.
Past that one a bit.
So they posted that, and a bunch of people were going, "Hey, this is sort of not a good idea." It was very controversial. Lots of discussions were had, and they originally said this is the ban list. Then it was like, oh no, this is just what we're looking at for the ban list. We're going to do a tournament to try this ban list. You know, we're still testing. We're still whatever. And then they announced that they were planning on adding a couple more people to the committee. Questions were raised about the, let's say, homogeneity of the committee. In a few different ways, and
that's a good word. I think that's a good word.
And then as part of that, Zane, one of the founders of Top Deck, who was not on the committee, though Mikey, one of the other founders, was, said, you know, something pretty not great, and then it was deleted, and then someone posted a screenshot and was like, "Hey, what was this about?" And then he said, "You know what? Screw it. I stand by my statements." And then people started posting other statements that Zane had Zane had said. Or made.
Yeah.
Zane had made was what I was gonna say initially, and then I switched to said, and then it
yeah,
was
just
med,
lost
and it was just all bad. I'm a little rusty. Sorry, everyone. So,
you can't blame us for the occasional stumble during this one, considering we've been out of the game for, you know, a third of a year or so.
Yeah, people started posting some other statements and some very unsavory, let's say, political opinions, and then just a whole bunch of, you know, previous negative interactions all were sort of brought up, and it made it outside the CEDH community, because a lot of the drama that's been surrounding that in the past has been sort of contained.
Very quickly as well. Like it like breached containment basically immediately.
And like was immediately everywhere. So the newly formed CEDH RC, I believe, has disbanded, or at least like 4 of the 5 people who were on it have publicly announced that they're no longer on it. So let's just call that disbanded.
Effectively disbanded.
It seems that Top Deck is no longer going to be hosting events. They've removed Zane from a leadership role, though his ongoing involvement in the company as a whole is unclear, because he was the primary developer on their Command Tower software, which is obviously very widely adopted. And so they're not going to be hosting events anymore, it seems. They're finishing up with the Boil this year, and then they're done. A bunch of social media was deleted. The Top Deck Discord was deleted. And it all just sort of ripped through the community like wildfire. And now, while there's nothing officially confirmed yet, it seems like the Commander RC, the actual one, is looking
taking a bit more of a look.
Some sort of CAG-like body specifically for CEDH to consult with them and sort of advocate for maybe a slightly higher level of focus on the competitive meta and diversity.
Honestly, like, and not even like, we don't even necessarily need focus. I feel like a lot of people feel like we do need focus, but it's just some consideration.
yeah, that's a better word.
Yeah.
To be clear, the RC has unequivocally stated that they're not changing their primary mission, which is to create an enjoyable environment for casual play. That's not the goal here. This isn't moving to Commander's now a competitive format and we're going to ban for balance. But it's something of an olive branch of, having a group who can sort of point out things that might benefit the competitive side of the community, and they can weigh that against, potential negative impacts on the more casual side. I know they generally are just very reluctant to ban things, but possibly, having, like, I think there's definitely room for bans that can be identified of, like, either cards that just don't see a lot of play in casual and are really miserable in competitive, similar to how Flash was.
E.g. Flash, yeah.
Or cards that have a negative impact in casual Commander, like people generally don't find super fun, but
and are like also too good, yeah.
Yeah, and are very strong, and like are just, too good in the more competitive end of, like, maybe this can provide a little extra push for getting some of these not super popular cards over the threshold of, like, okay, but it's actually good to ban them.
It's like, it's like a lot more of that is like sort of about like management of like pressures inside of the format rather than actually like making large sweeping changes to a ban list.
Like, I will say EDH Rec, is a resource that, I mean, obviously it's colored by competitive players, but it's not like a competitive resource by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, and on the first two is this, in top 10 of saltiest cards on EDH Rec. Like Oracle and Dockside are both there. This is not like, it's not like these are cards that casuals just absolutely love playing against, and then now, like, we're going, just ban them.
Just get them out of the format, yeah.
Yeah, get them out of here. So, hopefully we'll see a little bit of movement on that. Obviously, the Commander RC hasn't done a lot in the last few years, particularly with the unfortunate passing of Sheldon last year.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, thing that hopefully this will definitely be out for them. I was about to say hopefully, I did the math in my head. It will be out for them. That's a commitment I'm making right now. On September 29th this year, I will be playing along with Jim from the Spike Feeders, and Cal from Playing with Power, and Flower from being on Twitter. In
famed internet personality.
Yes. There's a charity live stream for cancer research in honor of Sheldon. I'll get whatever Twitch channel it's going to be on. We can post that in the description. So if you'd love to come, if you want to come by and say hi or watch other parts,
throw a couple of dollars in.
Yeah, throw a couple of dollars for cancer that'd be cool.
Cool. Yeah. So now we're like sort of up to date on like the actual, people are now aware of sort of the surrounding things around CDH in the current date. Yeah, let's talk about more about the actual format itself, I guess.
Sure, yeah. I'll make sure to go back and just cut out all the like, incoherent screaming. That just,
cool. So yeah, I think even before we get into major set releases, we have a couple of things to acknowledge. Mainly set releases and how they sort of alter the meta a bit. Because I'm not sure the overall tournament meta really has changed a huge amount. I think maybe it's gone a bit more turbo over the previous couple of months. But realistically, it's more just gradual iteration and things being added to existing decks. I feel like a fair amount of. So yeah,
I mean, obviously with the exception, I guess we could go for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, get into just a big one being Modern Horizons 3. Honestly, yeah, I think I agree that Modern Horizons 3 is just sort of it's the right way to be broken for, or the right way to make a not a broken set, but a powerful set for, at least for CDH, which is absolutely not what they were considering for at any point during this development. But I feel at least Modern Horizons 2 was definitely there was a lot of really good stuff in there, and things that made large differences to decks. And I feel Modern Horizons 3 was more about you said pre-show, but incremental improvements to slots in a lot of these decks, and sort of opening up a bit more flexibility for game plans for a lot of them.
I mean, yeah, Nadu is certainly. I mean, as a deck, it's burst onto the scene in a pretty big way.
But also, I don't think not who is unhealthy for the format, but it's not because he's too good. It's because he's just good enough, and the combo turns are horrific
and miserable.
Just not actually good on a functional level.
Yeah. So looking at it in the tournaments, basically since Nadu's release, Timnacrom has by far the most top 16s, and then Rogsai, Sisay, and Nadu are all basically tied. And then there's a massive jump down to anything below that. So, I mean, obviously, newer players more invested players who are more confident picking up a new deck are going to be the ones who were first to Nadu. So it's probably overperforming somewhat, would be my guess.
Slightly, yeah. But it's also it's one of those ones where the deck isn't. It's sort of difficult to specifically hate out the deck. A lot of the axes that it works on don't intersect hugely with the other meta decks. And it's obviously got some fair bit of power in there. So I'm not sure that I would expect to just drop off the face of the planet, but maybe drop
no
points. Yeah.
I don't think it will stay up there with the conversion of decks that are popular. It has conversion rates more I mean, it's higher than Timnacrom, it's higher than Sisay, it's almost up there with Rogsai. I don't necessarily expect it to hold that, but I think it'll hold as a reasonable option.
Really more
presumably a relatively popular one, or one with a material meta share.
The thing go for it.
I do think we'll see a slight adjustment to do something about it.
We'll see.
Like,
I mean, if it becomes a real issue in like casual ADH, then like yeah, absolutely. And it definitely is one of those things that could become a bit of an issue for just playability. If
oh no, I meant like people
if,
will put cards in their decks that are good against it, not it's going to get banned.
Oh really? Okay, yeah, that's fair. But that's what I was saying though. Like I don't like what are the cards that are good versus Nadu? Like they're sort of like the ones that are really bad for it are like, I don't know. I feel like those ones are sort of more solvable in terms of
wait, are you
just
not
like their actual
teching
removable
Hirobi Death's Whale in all your decks now?
Well, yeah, I was just like for stuff like I mean like the obvious one is like Null Rod, but does any deck really want to be a Null Rod deck right now? Is sort of the issue.
No,
and
it's Drake, and Draneth. Those are the cards that people need.
But like
to
the Drakes,
in their decks.
the Drakes are very workable, right? Where like the Nadu decks just play a ton of clones, so it's really just the Draneth that's the issue. And like I don't know, there are other issues with Draneth as well, where like other decks also want Draneths gone, and not having time to set up isn't great.
Yeah, that's it's definitely not like I'm not saying that any of those are like, oh, just put this in your deck, like beat all Nadu pilots with this one easy trick. But having like I just trying to point removal at Nadu is just like gonna be a losing battle.
That's a bit of a losing battle, yeah, because you're just over-wanting yourself. It's like okay. But yeah, I think the other issue that I sort of have with this is not going to be a naughty podcast, I swear. I'm just getting one more point in, which is that it's sort of rough to give to new players as well. Where like previously, I feel like Kinnan was really serving the same role. Like even though not just because they're the same colors, but it was like sort of filling a lot of the same role in the meta. I feel like. And Kinnan is a lot easier and a lot more efficient for new players to pick up, people with that experience. It's pretty easy to pick up the game plan, which is like you dump a handful of mana and then just start spinning Kinnan as like the base case. And then it's like pretty easy to go up from there. Nadu is like pretty bad to give to a new player because the decisions get like weird and it like requires like a lot of attention throughout like the entire combo turn a lot of the time, and like knowing when to stop and knowing like at what points you need to use the top deck tutor during the combo turn and that kind of stuff. And the fail case is like really bad. It's like somebody just like spinning their wheels for like half an hour on a turn that's not going to win them the game.
And then they get through 43 cards and then run out of mana, and then it's like
yeah, exactly.
Jesus.
So anyway, we'll see how much of an issue that becomes, but anyway. Yeah, and then I mean aside from that, yeah, like not really a whole lot. There's like again, like Necrodominance is like an incremental upgrade in a lot of ways, and then you have stuff like Storm Drake and Mockingbird. I think Mockingbird might be the most applicable one from MH3.
Yeah, I think that's one that we're like I'm honestly not like a huge believer. But
it's just the ability to grab, especially in green decks, I feel like the ability to grab it off of an RCE is like very nice.
Yeah, that's fair. I really hate the fact that if you do anything other than cast it, it's a flying man.
Yeah, you can't do flickering shenanigans with it or so.
Like, can't flicker it, can't like neoform something or like Eldritch Evolution into a clone for some purpose. It's just like, oh, it's actually just literal flying men. Unless you're casting it, which is awkward. And obviously trying to copy anything like expensive kind of sucks. Like,
yeah.
It seems like oh, sorry. What?
I know, just before people get to us in the comments, I know Mockingbird is not Modern Horizons. We just shifted it past Modern Horizons into other new cards. Anyway, continue.
Bloomburrow also came out in the interim because we're so crap that we missed 2 set releases.
2 sets.
Yeah. Whoops. Sorry about that. Yeah. I'm not a huge believer, and I have appreciated the value of a flying man in Thrasios Tymna before, and I'm like, I don't know if I actually... I've played Narcomoeba, we played Wingcrafter, that was a thing that we did.
I was about to say, like, Mockbird's definitely better than Wingcrafter. It definitely holds that.
Yeah, I don't currently play Wingcrafter, though. So yeah, it's a neat one, that's for sure.
And then, like, I don't know, Bloomburrow also had like a very similar thing going on though, where it's like the set's a lot more about like incremental upgrades and like no real big bomby stuff. There's like a flood collar, the new shimmer mirror for non-creatures, into the flood maw. I've not seen a whole lot of into the flood maw yet, but that card looks cracked, and I'm surprised that more people aren't playing it.
I mean, the thing is that I feel like people aren't playing it because the decks that would want it are decks that are like
Also, dockside abuse decks.
right. So like anyone who's playing Chain
Yeah.
Vapor, that's probably because they're a dockside abuse deck. And
Well,
then,
yeah, no, but that's so the whole thing with Into the Flood Maw for me is that like you can play it in the decks where you don't want to be playing Chain of Vapor, right? And it's like super efficient in that slot.
but like what deck wants to play this? Like, would you ever play this over Cyclonic Rift?
I think it's reasonable. I don't know. Like, are there not like maybe not. I'm reading out the sentence in my head that I was about to say and realize that like maybe there aren't any, but like blue based like blue permanent based mid-range decks that are like a bit lower to the ground.
Well, I feel like if you're
I don't
low
know.
enough,
Stuff like-
if you're like low enough, to
Like
the ground,
Malcolm Timna, Rafine. I guess it is sort of just like Esper stuff, maybe some blue black stuff. Talion.
yeah,
I think Talion would love this.
sure. Well, I feel like in Italian you just play both, so it's like
Yeah. I don't know.
I've definitely put together lists with more than one bounce spell in them before.
Yeah, it's just like I'm not sure that you want Chain of Vapor that much in Talion. Maybe you do. Maybe I'm.
Well, no, you don't want.
crash, but-
No, I'm sorry. When I say both, I mean like this and.
Oh, Psych Rift, sure. Yeah, for sure.
But like I don't know. I feel like, it's definitely a lot worse than. Like I feel like in most decks, it's either like not being able to hit your own stuff is like a critical downside, and then in some other decks, or like decks where that's not a critical downside, you'd much rather the upside on a 2-mana spell than have it be 1 mana.
Yeah.
So then you're just kind of looking at decks where you're gonna play both, which I think is a pretty small list.
Yeah. I mean, stuff like, I don't know, yeah.
I'd play it in Cody if anyone was still playing Cody.
I would absolutely jam it into a Cody deck. I think I'd probably play it in Thrust Hymna too. Maybe over like I could see this over like a second creature removal spell, or like low CMC removal spell, something like a decay in some situations. I don't know, that kind of stuff. Anyway. Yeah, so new sets. I sort of briefly talked about meta, sort of where the meta's at, gradual iterations. Yeah, I don't think it's like too much different right now. It's just sort of we're sort of like, I feel like in a coalescing phase of meta development where it's sort of packing back down into, and this sort of goes along with like the more recent sets being, again, gradual improvements and not really like big meta overhauls or like big printings for any specific deck. We're sort of in a like consolidation phase of like a bunch of the meta decks sort of figuring out where they're at in the meta and getting a bit more specialized and sort of figuring out slots better and positioning better.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely in an optimization phase, not a not a die shrink.
Correct. Cool. So, with all that in mind, I think we can get on to the primary topic here, which is just keeping up with the times.
Wait,
basically,
but the intro's almost half an hour long. We can stall this out a little bit more.
we keep going. We don't have to do a main topic. We've figured that out one. We figured that one out. Oh man. Actually, no, never mind. That is a readism. That's not me losing it. That's just I've always had that. Yeah, I feel like we have actually sort of figured out the topicless episode relatively recently, but that is not for today, I don't think. Anyway, so main topic for today is sort of decks that like significantly shift in like core strategy over time, and sort of more importantly, how to keep up with those, sort of how to identify it when it happens, and how to keep sort of on top of that entire sort of cycle that happens when a deck like really needs to overhaul how it plays for a specific meta because new card printings have happened because of whatever, like because there are like cards that are seeing play specifically in the meta that you have a hard time dealing with, that you need to deal with in a different way, all that good stuff. The stuff that normally pushes you to play different decks, that kind of thing. Yeah, so I feel like it's something that I've gotten better at over time, actually. And I think it's something broadly that like it's a skill that you sort of gradually pick up as you just like play longer, as you just get more reps in at the game, and like have to deal with more meta shifts, because you just have to identify when it's like when you have to stop holding on to something. When do you think that like when do you realize that you have to change your entire mindset? So like I think a very good example of this recently has been in our local play group with Keegan, friend of the show, playing Urza, where Keegan was a proponent of like polymorph Urza for a very, very long time, and has just recently switched over to non-polymorph, just basically due to new cards being printed primarily, and then like some meta stuff being hard to actually like win off of casting a polymorph, hard to resolve it, hard to win after resolving it, and some of the enticing new stuff to play in the creature slots. And yeah, I think it's like Keegan, I think, finally realized that it was time to move over, but maybe could have experimented with it earlier, although I think sort of the point that I'm getting at here is that he realized that like the deck doesn't have to be built that way anymore, and that it's not really the optimal way to do it, and sort of hopped in like both feet with like, okay, well, like let's make the creature version work, and it started like really doing stuff like like stripping out the orbs from the deck, sort of like working around different play patterns toward actually getting to the win, because the layers are sort of different, and the lines to the win look a lot different now, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like I think it's it can be difficult to really like identify when what you're doing before isn't or like when it's been superseded by new printings. Obviously, like Urza kind of feels like it has like a, or like polymorph Urza had a cheat mode on that of like making it extremely easy, where it was like, okay, have all the creatures that have been printed that I really want to play, like, are they good enough to drop the polymorphs? But I think with a lot of other decks, it can be a little bit like, if you're looking at swapping, not just when I say a combo package, I don't just mean like the specific win cons, but like the stuff around them and how that changes
support and
how you play the deck. Like you can see, I think we'll get to this a little bit later, but like devoted druid stuff has like, obviously we got Swift Wreck, and that was a thing for a while, and then we also got Brewmaster, Hazel's Brewmaster, and it's like, okay, well, does that like shift how I want to play this deck? Like if you were playing a combo package that didn't gel well with that, realizing when you need to switch over can be really difficult in a lot of ways, because there's not the clean cutness that there is with something like Urza Polymorph.
Like Urza, where Urza's a really good one, because it's a very obvious like the change that needs to happen when you do need the change, and it's like it's a thing that you're constantly evaluating anyway, because there are only really two builds of the deck, like broadly, maybe like three or so, but whatever, two main builds. But yeah, it's sort of an illustrative point of sort of what happens at a sort of micro scale, but for other decks can be a lot more like single slots, or like packages of 5 slots or whatever, and then like entire interlocking surrounding packages.
I feel like another thing we saw with this, which we saw with like a lot of decks that were, I mean, Thrasios Tymna again, but also just decks that tended to be more, or considered going more on the Staxy side of mid-range, like maybe something like Rocco too.
Yep.
was with the One Ring, and then sort of changing, like, a lot of those decks were, I mean, some of them didn't fully switch over, but like
Switch over at all, yeah.
focused decks that were like really actively looking to hate on artifacts. I feel like we're then sort of given kind of an awkward choice of like,
Choice
okay,
to make, yeah.
obviously, like when you play an oof deck, you play less fast mana because you have that anti-synergy, or you know, often a lot of it or some of it won't make the cut. And then you're sort of presented with this like, oh, also, do I want to go all in on Dockside combos if I'm also playing like Null Rod and Stony Silence? Like oofs generally in dock, if you have a Dockside combo outlet, you can generally get an oof out of play unless it's like exactly a meal.
Yeah, but sometimes it restricts how many you want to play, how like which ones that you're actually like putting in the deck. Yeah.
But like with other stuff, you can, you know, if you have like Temur Sabertooth or Baron or Cloudstone Curio or Chthonian Nightmare, you can like oof isn't an issue, but Stony Sense and Null Rod still very much an issue for those combos. And it's been like I think a lot of those decks, many people like tried staying on oof for a really long time. Some people moved off it, and it was like I think a lot of those decks were kind of in crisis for a bit. Looking at stuff
for actually
like
a
leaning into
hot
Dockside.
second,
Yeah.
Well, and also like they've just been printing like more like decent utility artifacts. I feel like same thing with like Soul Cauldron, right? Soul Cauldron is a big one that like a lot of decks sort of wanted access to, and it was another sort of pushing force for, you know, like on like sort of tipping the scales on the side of like not oof.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I feel like there are a bunch of like, along with something like Urza, which again, like very obvious sort of the changes that need to be made, and you're just like always sort of evaluating like, okay, is it time to make this change? Is it time to make this change? Is it time to make this change that we already know is going to happen? There are decks that are sort of on the opposite side of that spectrum for like specifically for like new card printings, which I think one of the big ones is Sisay, 5-color Sisay. And obviously, like, deck that I'm familiar with, but I do think that, like, it's a great example of this kind of deck shift where Sisay, there are always going to be so many new potential printings, and the type of printings the deck cares about are weird, idiosyncratic cards, not like, you know, like general improvements like a deck like Urza, commander like Urza, where in Sisay's case, you just have to constantly be on the lookout for what new cards actually do to the deck and what they're actually, like, what pressures they're actually exerting on deck building. Like, okay, they've just printed something really good for, like, the secondary combo in my deck currently. Like, does that mean that, like, I should be leaning into the secondary combo more than a primary combo? Should I be cutting some support slots from the primary combo? Is there, like, do they actually overlap? If they don't overlap, like, do I just fully commit to one? If they do overlap, like, okay, what are we now missing? Can I afford to make, like, slot cuts because I don't need to fully support that one anymore, and they sort of just work better together in a tighter number of slots? Anyway, huge amount of things that you have to be taking into account, and we see that a lot with, like, you know, Sisay decks look very different from each other, like, basically all the time.
Yeah,
and are constantly changing in weird ways, and like they're sort of constantly diverging and converging from each other, because like you'll have like two people who are playing, you know, like 3 cards off in 1 month, and then a month or two later, like a set afterward, 2 sets afterward, they're suddenly like on like 20 card differences.
Yeah, it's that honestly that's one I just steer clear from. People
yeah,
certainly have opinions, and I don't want my head ripped off. So I'll defer to your expertise on that one.
I am not claiming expertise. I know exactly what I want out of Sisay the Commander, and I'm not really paying attention to much else.
You heard it here first, folks. Reed is the greatest Sisay pilot of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-professed, actually. But yeah, like it just sort of illustrates the range of like what you're looking at when you're looking at like when there are new cards being printed, when there's old tech being dredged up, like what do you have to be paying attention to? And like, you know, you can always, it is nice to like know ahead of time sort of like what type of what type of thing you have to be looking at for new printings if you already know what your commander is. But it can get a lot more complex, and you need to do a lot, like, be conscientious a lot more about this stuff when you're looking at, like, maybe you're a tournament player and you have like a few decks, like 3 decks already in your repertoire, but are also looking at like potentially trying to break the meta and come up with new brews and things. This is like just the kind of stuff that you have to be paying attention to, like, constantly on a bunch of axes.
Yeah, it can be a lot to keep on top of, especially with a deck like Sisay, where, like, you know, there are some decks where you look at a set and you're like, I'm pretty unlikely to get anything that's gonna really help me out here, or like fundamentally change the deck. But like, they print a lot of legendary creatures, and they want them to be playable.
Yeah,
so they tend to print a lot of good legendary creatures.
Yeah,
and that means you have a lot of cards to sift through.
Tough. Yep. I'd say the other big reason why decks change is almost certainly meta development. So just nothing about the actual deck or the cards that it has access to itself necessarily has to change that much, but just the environment in which you play that deck can change and can sort of require broad rethinkings of how you build those decks. I mean, the big one that we've already sort of talked about a bit is sort of Stax decks. You know, in the context of new printings, like, oh, maybe like something is good enough to want to draw you away from the hate that you're currently playing and sort of like make you actually want to play the thing that you're hating out instead. But a lot of the times as well for meta developments, just the stuff that you're hating out might just get like a lot less prevalent and might get a lot worse. And that means that you might have to do even if you're not switching decks entirely, you're gonna have to do some like rethinking of your Stax packages and how that affects your win cons. Because, you know, a lot of the time what you're doing with the Stax deck is you're sort of threading the needle on, okay, my win condition is this because it works around a bunch of my Stax elements and it like works well under that plan. And as soon as you start sort of messing around with you're sort of fiddling with your individual Stax elements, it can sort of mess with win cons and sort of change like the entire way that you prioritize building the deck. So yeah, historically Stax decks affected a lot by this.
Yeah, like, I mean, and if you think about it, that makes sense because like Stax decks are sort of inherently built. There's an element of them that's like reactive to the meta in a much more direct way than a lot of other decks, where like if your goal is to disrupt everyone else's plan, the tools you need to do that really vary quite heavily depending on everyone else's plan. And so, I mean, like, obviously, a long time ago, Stax decks actually looked more similar to what they look like now than maybe they did 5 or 6 years ago, because like a lot of the stuff at the top of the meta was like Zur and Jaleva and like this Nas, you know, fast stuff, and then, you know, we got the Flash Hulk Winters
era, where suddenly you can't play Rule of Law anymore,
where
like at all.
Yeah, Rule of Law was boy, was that a frustrating experience. Nothing like having several players at the pod have a 1 card or like 1 spell instant speed win con to make you appreciate having a 1 spell turn limit. Like, just the classic, oh, that's a really scary spell, I'll counter it. Oh, well, the blue player can't cast spells. Flash. Like, Jesus. And then obviously Flash was banned, and a lot of that, like, you know, people were playing, we saw a lot of Rest in Peace, we saw a lot of Draft Digger's Cage while it was legal, and not a lot of Rule of Law, and I mean, honestly, I think those cards, they're frustrating to play. They're obviously, like, Breach is hugely prevalent, but the problem is Breach decks have Oracle as, like, a free pivot. So,
hey, look, the thing that we've complained about for, like, literal years, but like, Oracle
Well, okay, we need to reassure the people that we're still the same old podcast.
Like, exactly. It's also not a bad point to hammer home. Like, it fucking sucks that, like, probably the fastest consistent combo in the format also usually gets to play along with one of the most Stax resilient combos in the format as well.
Could that possibly be a problem?
or interaction.
Nah,
Yeah,
no way, right?
Never.
Yeah, so maybe in a world without Oracle, we'd see those coming back again, like some Stax decks that have decided they don't want to play Artifact Hate because they're doing dockside stuff or whatever, might shift into Rest in Peace more than Grafdigger's Cage, as Stax decks tend to be creature focused, and creature tutors and Grafdigger's Cage don't always play nice, but Rest in Peace, the new creature, Soulless Jailer?
Soul Warden? Soulless Jailer? That's the one.
Soulless Jailer, I think is what it's called.
Yeah. Weathered
Stops people casting non-creature spells, but still lets you get creatures from your library.
Yeah.
Stuff like that could see play. I mean, also, decks that aren't on dockside stuff and also don't have access to Oracle, I think should very heavily be looking at going all in on the ETB hate.
Torp Orbs for sure, dude. Oh my god. Torp Orbs have been so good for so long.
And so we got the most recent one, whose name I always forget, but the Flash one.
Yeah. The really good one.
Oh my god, this is embarrassing.
Doorkeeper or something? It's a gargoyle.
Doorkeeper Thrall. Yeah, Doorkeeper.
Yeah.
Something like, yeah. I am rusty. I didn't wind up keeping it in Thrasios and Tymna, but I played it in Thrasios and Tymna, which is an Oracle deck, because we got it basically, it put together everything I wanted from all the previous iterations of that effect. Where it was
of Torp Orb on legs. Yeah,
it was a creature. It was 2 mana. It finally actually had flash.
It's a flying body. It's a Tymna Donner.
Yeah, the flying body was really nice with Tymna, and it hit artifacts, so people couldn't get protection, which was nice from the One Ring. That's it's relatively incidental, but it's come up a couple of times.
It helps, especially getting your actual forcing soft winds through as well, where it's just you need to not have protection so I can actually murder you here.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one. I guess also, I think, was he playing it before he went back into creatures? But Keegan, going back to Urza, also put Torp Orb in there.
Yep.
I
think
he might have been
huge,
playing it
huge help.
I'm not sure if he was playing it before he got off Polymorph, but
I think
the construct is a lot less important when you're not trying to Polymorph, because having to Polymorph your Urza always really sucks.
It's so bad.
Because you can just do it with any 2 0-mana rocks if you have Urza, or even a 1, I don't know, some mana rock and something that's 0 or 1 mana.
And then suddenly you're trying to do with a bauble and a crypt, and it's okay, well, I just actually can't win this turn.
Oh, and I don't have the blue to recast Urza, yeah. So, it definitely makes it easier to play, even if it wasn't technically impossible. Yeah.
Matters more and stuff. Yeah, I mean, the big ones as well, this is sort of less overhaul-y and more iterative, which is not necessarily what we're really talking about right now, but iteration is a sort of a minor, not really axis or example. It's a minor aspect of this, this mindset or this activity of keeping decks up to date and sort of constantly being on top of it with stuff Blue Farm and the Gila's meta developments. Blue Farm is sort of not at all overhauling, because that deck is always the exact same, because you're playing Crom and Tymna, and the Grixis core just does not change at all. It's really hard to get away from those win-cons.
I think it changed from the very early days of Blue Farm lists, where it was still actually a man deck.
But if we're talking about modern Blue Farm in this case,
I'm also not sure how much that change was because the meta changed around it versus just because
versus
man was
optimization of the
always
deck.
The better deck.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those decks that it's just you are constantly you have to reevaluate certain packages continuously. Stuff how much you want to prioritize instant speed wins versus protected wins versus value versus having to keep up with some of the faster stuff in the format, and just have to dedicate slots to sort of shitty rituals. Looking at you, Red Flame. Love you, buddy. No, I don't. Take it out of your decks. um, and then like Najeela is sort of like a midway between some of those examples. I feel like where Najeela had like one big change that it really had to go through, which was sort of moving from like sort of creature mid-rangey kind of thing into just like aligning more closely with the Grixis core in a lot of ways. Not necessarily, I don't think like the Turbo Najeelas were ever necessarily super correct, but certainly I think playing Breach in the deck was a pretty big change in terms of like large scale strategy, and I think was like correct in the long run.
Flash Hulk Najeela?
Yeah. I think
there's a throwback.
That deck was only ever correct if nobody in your meta knew how to play Kenrith. Because Kenrith just like invalidated that.
Wait, I feel like that deck was played before Kenrith was printed, is what.
It was. I don't think it was good at the time, and I think like Kenrith was much better like Flash Mirror Breaker.
Yes, for sure. Oh, I don't think it was good as a Flash Mirror Breaker at all.
And I also don't think it was better than Thrasios Temnos, so like
I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah, but it's sort of like at a midpoint in that where it's like it's had a large overhaul that was like necessitated by meta developments. But for the most part, it is sort of just like an iterative deck where you just like sort of gradually make slot changes and swap stuff out for better printings, and a lot of the time as well, just like change it just a bit to adapt to the meta. Honestly, like Najeela has sort of it's more at the point now where Najeela is less of like a meta staple and is more of actual meta call itself. So.
Yeah, it's
I feel
like we just have not seen all that much of recently.
Well, I can sort of tell you why as well. It is because like turns out that Sisay is actually like a good 5-color deck with a good 5-color commander in like the types of games that end up getting played when you have to care about your commander that doesn't, like directly contribute to winning the game in the fastest possible manner.
I'm telling Pongo you said that.
I don't know, man. I like is to say the better Derevi deck, maybe. I'll leave it
honestly
at that.
I think we're learning that a lot of things are actually surprisingly good Derevi decks.
Dude, it's the year of Derevi. It's actually crazy.
He's so back. The Bird Wizard is back.
It's so good. Yeah, so I think that's like there's like the big sort of like axes in terms of like monitoring meta developments for changing strategies. I think the big case is always going to be specifically Stax pieces, or like more broadly than that, even interactive pieces. I think like that's why like interactive slots probably have the highest turnover in terms of like just cards cycling through them, because those are really like where you get to the fine tuning against like individual metas. But a lot of the time it's not rare to see package overhauls in the case of like stack stuff, or even combo packages, or like large scale mid-range packages as well, are sort of a one that you usually have to take a look at, mid-range value engines. But aside from that, there's also I mean, this is like sort of biased, and you might be able to tell from the podcast that you're currently listening to, but there are also decks that sort of undergo like large scale changes relatively frequently, or at least have historically, both in terms of like just individual slots and smaller packages, as well as like overarching deck design. And I think one of the largest examples of this is Thrasios Tymna. Thrasios Tymna has gone through a lot of identity shifts, and sort of like continuously does, just because it turns out pile of good cards. In order to make a deck out of pile of good cards, you'd have to play all the good cards, and the good cards are constantly changing.
I
don't know.
Think this is slander from some of the greatest cards I've ever played, or to some of the greatest cards I've ever played, and I will not stand for it. But
love you, Wayne Crafter. Love you, Vorash Shapeshifter.
Yeah, I was not necessarily gonna go to Windcrafter.
Yeah.
Wait, did you play Volraz Shapeshifter?
I played a post Flash Hulk deck for a bit that was on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess it was. And then what, you got Activated Sleeper? Those are.
Yeah.
I actually don't know which one I would prefer.
I mean, Activated Sleeper, if Activated Sleeper existed in Flash meta, it would have been horrendous. Like, just absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, it would have been fantastic, obviously.
Yeah.
Because you could fit an Abolisher and a Sack Outlet and
yes,
Activated Sleeper in the same pile. Yeah.
It solves the issue, yeah.
No, I get it. I do still understand how Flash Hulk worked, despite how long it's been. But yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I think it's also somewhat struggled with identity in the ways we talked about with like it definitely fits in the not exactly Stax deck, but like a mid-range deck that has often leaned more in a light Stax direction.
Yeah, it's like a toolboxy. It's a toolbox deck, right?
Yeah, it's a toolbox deck, which often it's good to have some stacks in your toolbox.
Like interactive permanence, yeah.
Yeah. So you got your Voidwalker, you got your Op Agent, you got stuff like that. Historically, we've seen things like Oof. Sometimes like limited rule of law effects.
Yeah.
I mean, like I went full rule of law with my Stax Cats build, and boy, did I have some miserable tournaments.
Yeah, that was sort of a low point, I feel like.
Hey, I did fine with that deck.
Yeah, you did, but in terms of like
I just
sort of
hated it.
willingness to actually play Magic and like, you know,
Yeah, it was
extract yourself from the iffy situations, like it got a bit tough.
Yeah. But like yeah, you know, even just playing like a one of Deafening Silence or
yeah,
possibly like, or I mean some people did Archon just for like the land hate aspect. It was usually just Deafening Silence because it was 1 mana, or you could play like things that hated on multi-spells while not necessarily fully disallowing them. I think mostly that's gone in more recent lists. And we've seen a bit of a resurgence of people doing like Nadu and breakfast stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean also the aforementioned Brewmaster, Devoted Druid, Swift Reg.
Devoted Druid stuff.
Just turns
very
out
nice package.
having a cheap
very convenient.
Wow, did you just say my package is nice?
Clip it. Clip and ship it.
I mean, yeah, that one's that one's in the final.
It's yeah, I mean like the fact, but also like the fact for that kind of stuff where it's like with it's also like very survivalable.
Yes.
Which is a pretty big upside for Thrust decks.
Yeah, which is why lots of decks don't play survival for some reason. Make it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like people just that card just get memory hold.
I think
like,
so.
that card is still just unreasonably broken.
Cracked, yeah. I think like if you have like any amount of like graveyard value or like being like having pieces accessible through the graveyard, it's just like fantastic. And even if you don't, it's just like okay, repeatable creature tutor. Especially for things like even just stuff with Flash, it just makes it so good. If you have an op agent and an endurance in your deck, or just like anything like that,
you have an op agent, an endurance, and a bowmasters in your deck, and you're like, all right, I'm passing with like 4 mana up. What are you gonna do? You want to draw cards? You want to tutor? You sure? Yeah, it's a pretty good card. But yeah, it's seeing. I think Thrasios Doom is seeing a little bit of a rebirth, which you know I love to see. I mean, I never left. You know, I'm not a Fairweather fan. I'm a ride or die.
It sticks on forever.
But it's yeah, I'm having some fun, having some good discussions with people who are picking the deck back up again. So that's
nice. Love to see it. But anyway, yeah, it's one of those. That's one of those ones. I think there might be a couple of other decks that sort of followed a similar curve. Although I think Thrasios Doom is probably the most drastic and certainly the most high profile.
I mean, the thing is that I feel like people have called it different decks, or like maybe it's different enough that it doesn't count. Thras Bruce is also like
that's fair. Yeah,
pinballed through a lot of different iterations.
Yeah, and we're sort of. By the way, we're talking here about, especially with like commanders, sort of just like the most like the winningest version of the deck, or like, you know, you could call it the correct version of the deck for any given meta, any given tournament, that kind of stuff. Rather than talk about like individual deck builds necessarily, although a lot of the stuff could apply to like individual like builds of decks, builds of commanders.
I don't know. I don't know why. I've always felt like the Thras Bruce decks were like more like different builds than the Thrasios Tymna ones were.
Yeah, I think Thrasios Tymna has just like gone over like larger shifts over time. Like I think the Thras Bruce decks are still like largely sort of the same builds. They're just like still delineated into like the three big ones.
Well,
where I feel like
does anyone play Evolution?
I guess. What? Evolution? I thought you were going to say Blue Pod. Nobody plays Blue Pod. People still sort of play Evolution.
People play Blue Pod longer than they play... Wait, who plays... People play Sans Black Turbo? Why?
I think so. Dude, don't ask me. I've never played those decks. It's just don't.
There was a reason to play Blue Pod. Like, I had a specific goal in mind, and I mostly did it.
Now people don't. Anyway,
that's fair.
Yeah, there are. I feel like there are some decks, relatively high profile, sort of like just the Thrasios mid-range decks, honestly, just broadly. But I think just as well, just like generally, this is also something to sort of like view as a case study of like just how to keep your eyes out for like improvements and like even necessarily like you're not going to be the person that comes up with like the new hot tech a lot of the time for this stuff, and you just have to like, especially if you're playing a deck like this or something that like is undergoing a similar change where it's like, oh, it's not like working particularly well in the current meta, but you know that it can perform and it just like needs a bit of an overhaul. Just you have to just like keep eyes out for like what people are doing with it and like sort of new ideas and staying fresh, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think like that's sort of like the main stuff that at least I sort of wanted to talk about for the main topic. Basically the big takeaway is just being like, you just like don't get lazy. Be thinking about your I think like at least on like a tournament-ly cadence, is like probably the very least that you should be doing this of like, week or two, probably a few weeks, call it a month, before any tournament that you're going into. Just like, think about the position of the deck, actively think about stuff that you've been wanting to see and stuff that you haven't been actively wanting to draw in the deck, that kind of stuff. And then, just considering, has this felt good? Does it seem like people are prepared for my game plan? Is there any way that I can like get an edge on that? Is it an entire package swap? Is it a few cards, etc.? Just like you gotta actively think about the thing, make it a habit.
I feel like what you're forgetting though is that I hate thinking.
Yeah, no, I do. I really do. I like don't like having to consider all this stuff, but like, you just gotta build it into your routine.
You can't make me.
Well, just ride on the coattails of greatness for a bit. Why not?
True. Good plan.
Done well for me. Past year anyway. Cool. So yeah, I think unless you have any big ideas that you want to get out, I think we did a pretty good job of talking about a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I think we can move on to our listener question.
Cool. Absolutely. You put it down, so let's have you read it out.
That's my job. I see how it is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Mercy asks, why is the Japanese CEDH meta consistently different than the European, US, or Brazilian metas, which all seem way more homogenized from the same pool of ideas? I think that's probably because the US, Euro, and Brazilian metas are all working from the same pool of ideas because
it's the Anglosphere.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously a lot of these European countries are not primarily English speaking ones, but a lot of the ones that have large scenes have
very willing to sort of like talk or like integrate into historically English-speaking spaces.
Yeah, like the Swedes and the Finns and the Germans and the Portuguese. I was actually curious. I looked this up before the show. It turns out the Portuguese actually have very high English fluency, like even compared to like Spain and France.
I'm pretty sure it's a historical thing, but yeah.
Probably, yeah. But like, even that might explain, because the Portuguese, I think, have always punched above their weight in terms of the CEDH meta. which is
well,
cool
and
and awesome.
Brazilians as well.
Yeah,
Just broadly, like the Brazilian scene also pretty big.
yeah. So I think it's just because enough people in those countries speak English, and I mean, less true with like Brazil, but like Sweden, Finland, Portugal are all like relatively small countries, so it was probably harder to create like a large insular community, which was presumably why they wound up online talking with the English speaking CEDH community as well.
Yeah.
Whereas Japan is really big and has a lot of people who only speak
famously, yeah.
Japan
famously
has,
very large and very Japanese.
Yes. So I think it was probably much easier for them to create an insular meta.
Yeah. And we can actually, you can see this as well with the, it's sort of like, it gets less, not accolades, but like less attention than the Japanese scene as well. But it's a very similar case with the Russian CDH scene. The Russian CDH scene has always been like has had like a very large, very independent meta that you only really get like glimpses of from, at least from our perspective in North America.
Yeah, like every once in a while someone will make a tournament post or, I mean, also I think I think part of it as well is just the resources used, like
are just very different.
Like, I mean, obviously now we have like EDH Top 16, but even before that, like tournament reports from English speaking countries were generally like posted on Reddit. Like that was just how they were shared, and lists were shared on these like deck building sites. And a lot of Japanese, like if you go on it's MTG Top 8, that's what it's called, right?
Yeah.
And you go to EDH tournaments, a lot of them are Japanese because they just like use that, and that wasn't a resource that the English speaking places generally used because it wasn't optimized for reporting 4-player free-for-all like at all. I mean, it's literally called Top
Especially
8. Why would your EDH tournament have Top 8?
Don't use WPA. Yeah.
But like the data's sort of always been there, but just hasn't been like where people go to look, and presumably vice versa, right? Like they go and look at, I mean, presumably they have Japanese language forums or whatever that people talk on, and Discords and whatever.
Yeah, whatever the major thing is,
some sort of social media that people talk on, but also I bet a lot of them go to MTG Top 8 for lists and then are primarily seeing, I think it's changed a little bit now. More North American tournaments are reported on MTG.
I think they've like started explicitly supporting it and like doing a push to log more of them. But
because I feel like when I went and looked at it a couple times, like 3 or 4 years ago, it was literally just like it was like Japanese events. And so probably when people went and looked at it, they saw Japanese events results reported, and then went like, okay, I guess this is what the best decks are. It'll be interesting to see if that changes now that, because I just went now and most of these events aren't Japanese. So it'll be interesting to see if that sort of proliferates through.
Yeah. I will say though as well though that this is not a CDH exclusive phenomenon. Like for as long as there have been card games and tournaments in Japan, there has been the concept of the weird Japanese meta. Like this is a concept that's like well over 20 years old at this point. Of like, it turns out the Japanese metas are just weird from our perspective in like every format of basically every card game. I've played professional Yu-Gi-Oh as well, also a very similar phenomena. I mean, it's literally a separate like format in Japan on that side, but like if you've paid attention to like any legacy meta stuff, any modern meta stuff like that, the Japanese tournaments have always had weird and wacky and wonderful card choices and deck selections.
Which, you know, I rejoice in the diversity of creation. I'm here for it.
Real. Yeah, I mean, love to see it. I will always remember the well, I guess I won't remember the card that I'm about to tell the story about. Is it Mind Harness? Might be. No, it's not Mind Harness. It's whatever. But I will always remember the like whatever, like God, it might have been like 6 years of those at this point or something like that. But looking at a Japanese Solvala list, model green Solvala list, and we're playing a bunch of like very weird enchantment destruction, and like there was like an aura destruction spell, and I was wondering why that was, and I went through and looked at a bunch of the blue lists that were like in the same tournament and in the same meta, and there are just all of them were playing I forget what it's called now, but a single blue enchant creature aura that I think when an ETB tapped the creature, you lost life equal to its power, and then it didn't untap, but it could like only enchant red and green creatures. So it was just like this entire metagame of like people playing this one mana enchantment Solvala answer that didn't take her off the board. And then the Solvala players all playing like anti-aura stuff. Anyway. One of my first introductions to that in CDH.
Wait, why would they not play Mind
I
Harness,
don't
though?
do not ask. Mind Harness? I think Mind Harness
was the one that
oh, sorry.
control.
I think
it has enough.
Mind Harness was the other one, yeah. I think I might be misremembering the card anyway. I knew there were also Mind Harnesses in there, but it's just expensive to keep those going.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah.
I mean, there's Controlled Instincts, which just as enchant red or green creature, it doesn't untap during its controller's untap step.
I think that was the one, yeah. Instincts. Yeah, Controlled Instincts. Classic.
Wow.
Complex enchant. Yeah. Like just like not good. Yeah, cool. So I think that about gets us to the end of this episode. Hopefully, yeah, we will be releasing these more. Won't talk about it a huge amount. I know we have to discuss as I won't say this on the episode, but we will be discussing things pertaining to the episode, or the podcast rather. And yeah, we're gonna try to get onto a bit more of a regular recording cadence, and we'll see. There have been discussions about gameplay and stuff, so maybe don't necessarily keep your hopes up, but it's definitely being considered. Anyway, that about wraps it up for this episode. If y'all would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email at intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks goes to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for the show and allow us to work toward improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/IntoTheNorthPodcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, and to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks-ish. Until then, see ya.
Have a good